Imagine holding over 100 patents,
Right.
winning the most prestigious awards in your entire field, and going to your grave genuinely believing you are an absolute hero to humanity.
Like a literal savior.
Exactly. But then imagine that decades later, historians look back at your life's work and basically declare you the single most destructive biological organism in the history of planet Earth.
It is just a staggering paradox. I mean, we usually think of environmental shifts or historical disasters as being the result of these massive impersonal forces.
Yeah, like geology or global economics.
Right, sociology, stuff like that.
Yeah.
It is deeply unsettling to think that a single person, just a guy sitting in a laboratory, could leave a permanent geological scar on the entire planet.
But that is exactly what we are looking at today. Welcome to the deep dive.
Glad to be here.
Our source material today is a really comprehensive Wikipedia profile on an American mechanical and chemical engineer. His name is Thomas Midgley Jr., and our mission for this deep dive is to explore the ultimate cautionary tale of innovation. We are unpacking the life of a man whose, well, his brilliant solutions caused some of the worst man-made disasters in history.
And the crazy thing is, you interact with the ghosts of his inventions every single day without even knowing it.
Oh, totally.
I mean, you drive past them, you open doors cooled by them. They're everywhere.
Okay, let's unpack this. How does someone become a one-man environmental disaster without ever intending to?
Well, to understand the sheer scale of the disasters Midgley caused, we first have to understand his genuine brilliance.
Right, because he wasn't a cartoon villain.
Exactly. He didn't set out to destroy anything. He was simply a relentless, obsessive problem solver.
So looking at his background, Midgley was born in 1889 in Pennsylvania, and he was born right into a family of inventors.
Oh, yeah. Invention was totally in his blood.
Right. His father invented automobile tire tech, and his maternal grandfather actually invented the inserted tooth saw. So looking at the world as this series of mechanical problems to be fixed, that was just in his DNA.
Yeah, he grew up in Columbus, Ohio, and eventually graduated from Cornell University.
That was in 1911, right?
Right, with a degree in mechanical engineering. But what really stands out from his early life is this innate, almost quirky knack for finding bizarre uses for known substances.
He looked at nature and just saw raw materials waiting to be repurposed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like the source material is this incredible story from his high school baseball days.
Oh, I love this story. So Midgley figured out that if he chewed the bark of a slippery elm tree...
Just casually chewing on tree bark.
Right. If he chewed it, he could use the resulting saliva mixture to alter the surface tension and aerodynamics of a baseball.
Which is insane for a high schooler to figure out.
It really is. It gave the ball this dramatically more curved trajectory when he pitched, and it was so effective that professional baseball players eventually picked up the exact same practice.
And that perfectly encapsulates how his mind worked. You know, he looked at a physical problem, which was making a baseball harder to hit, and he synthesized a chemical solution.
He literally altered the friction.
Yeah. And that mindset, it only intensified as he got older. Later in his life, Midgley was known to carry a copy of the periodic table with him everywhere he went.
Literally everywhere. I'm thinking about this, and it's basically the 1920s equivalent of how we carry our smartphones today.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Yeah, like we pull out our phones to navigate a city or answer some random trivia question. Midgley pulled out the periodic table as his ultimate tool for navigating the physical world.
It was his killer app.
Yes.
Yes.
His app for solving reality's problems.
What's fascinating here is how that exact mindset, viewing the entire world as a chemical puzzle just waiting to be cracked, it set the stage for his very first world-changing invention.
Because he fundamentally believed that for every mechanical inefficiency, there was a chemical fix out there.
Exactly.
And because he saw the world as a purely chemical puzzle, it was only a matter of time before a massive corporation hired him to solve their biggest mechanical headache.
And that corporation was General Motors.
Right. They were facing this existential crisis that was holding back the entire automobile industry. And that was engine knock.
Yeah, so for anyone who isn't a gearhead, engine knock is this violent metallic pinging sound inside an internal combustion engine.
It sounds like the engine is breaking.
Pretty much. Because in a normal engine, the spark plug ignites the fuel-air mixture, and it burns smoothly, right, pushing the piston down.
Right.
But in those early higher compression engines, The pressure and the heat would cause pockets of unburned fuel to essentially explode prematurely.
Before the spark plug even fired.
Exactly.
And those premature explosions create shock waves that just slam into the piston. It completely damages the engine and severely limits how much power and efficiency you can actually get out of a car.
Automakers wanted to build faster, more powerful vehicles, but the literal laws of physics were stopping them.
So Midgley was assigned to the Dayton Research Laboratories under Charles Kettering to find a fuel additive that would stop these premature explosions.
And true to form, he systematically went through his periodic table.
He tried everything. I mean, he even tried adding tellurium to the fuel.
Oh man, the tellurium.
Yeah, it actually worked, but it produced a smell so incredibly terrible that it couldn't be eradicated. The sources say he smelled like garlic for months.
He had to sleep in a separate room from his wife.
But then, in December 1921, he basically hits the jackpot. He discovers that adding a compound called tetraethyl, or TLL, to gasoline prevented engine knock perfectly.
It was a mechanical miracle. At a chemical level, the tetraethyl would break down inside the hot engine cylinder.
Okay.
It coated the walls with lead oxide, and that layer of lead actually absorbed the free radicals in the fuel, which slowed down the combustion chain reaction.
So it smoothed out the burn.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Suddenly, compression ratios could go up, engines ran flawlessly, and the modern high-power automobile era was just unlocked.
But there was a massive catch.
A huge one.
The clue is right there in the name. Tetraethyl lead. General Motors, Standard Oil, and the DuPont Company all partnered up to produce and market this new miracle additive.
Right.
And the sources point out they very explicitly named the additive ethyl to avoid using the word lead anywhere in their reports or their advertising.
Yeah, it was a very deliberate rebranding. And we have to look at the underlying mechanics of why they pushed this specific chemical over others.
Because there were others, right?
Oh, definitely. The automotive and oil industries fully knew there were anti-knock alternatives. Ethanol, for instance, prevented knocking.
Right, grain alcohol.
Exactly. But from a corporate standpoint, you cannot easily patent ethanol. Anyone can make it.
So the profit margins were incredibly low.
Right. T-TEL, on the other hand, was a highly specialized patentable additive. It meant astronomical profits for GM and Standard Oil.
Wow. But the human costs became impossible to ignore almost immediately.
We got really dark really fast.
They set up manufacturing plants in Dayton, Ohio, Deepwater, New Jersey, and the Bayway refinery. And workers at these T-TEL plants started experiencing terrifying symptoms.
Hallucinations, profound insanity, and death from acute lead poisoning.
The Bayway plant alone had 5 deaths and multiple cases of severe insanity within its first 2 months of operation.
Just a completely toxic environment.
So I have to push back on the narrative of Midgley as just this innocent, naive inventor here. The dangers of lead exposure were known since the 2nd century BC.
Oh, absolutely.
How could Midgley possibly justify pushing this forward when workers in his own plants were literally hallucinating and dying?
This raises an important question about how innovators justify their creations. It really comes down to the concept of known unknowns.
Okay, what do you mean?
Well, lead's toxicity wasn't a secret. The sources note that efforts to limit lead's use date back to at least the 16th century. Midgley himself knew it was highly toxic.
He had to have known.
By 1923, he had absorbed so much lead himself that he had to take a long vacation to Miami just to try and cure his own poisoning.
Wait, really?
Yeah. He told people he needed to drop all his work and get a large supply of fresh air because his lungs were affected.
Wow. So he was acutely aware of the danger.
He was. But here is how he rationalized it. Midgley argued that the danger was entirely confined to the manufacturing process, not the everyday use by everyday consumers.
Oh, I see.
He pointed to tests on automobile exhaust and concluded that at a ratio of 1 part tetraethyl to 1,300 parts gasoline, the exhaust was perfectly safe for the public.
So he viewed the factory deaths as just a tragic but solvable industrial hygiene problem.
Exactly, a localized issue.
But what he completely ignored was the underlying biology of how lead actually interacts with the human body.
Right, because lead is a neurotoxin that mimics calcium.
Yeah. When you inhale microscopic lead particles from car exhaust, your body gets confused and pulls that lead directly into your bones and your brain.
It just absorbs it right in.
And it disrupts the synapses. Midgley completely failed to consider the cumulative, long-term chronic impact of slowly pumping microscopic particles of a neurotoxin into the global atmosphere day after day.
And to prove how safe he thought it was, he staged one of the most astonishing press conferences in scientific history.
This part is wild.
It really is. In October 1924, right as the state of New Jersey is shutting down the Bayway plant because people are literally dying, Midgley holds a public demonstration.
And what did he do?
He pours raw tetraethyl all over his hands.
Just bare hands.
Bare hands. Then he places a bottle of the chemical right under his nose and inhales the vapor for 60 straight seconds.
60 seconds of inhaling pure lead fumes. And he stands there and declares to the press that he could do this every single day without succumbing to any health problems whatsoever.
Yeah. It was pure theater, designed specifically to protect a highly profitable patent.
Unbelievable.
And it worked. After a brief halt and some federal intervention, production of leaded gasoline restarted in 1926. High-octane fuel was basically deemed an economic and military necessity.
You'd think the General Motors executives would quietly let him retire after all that controversy, though.
You would think so.
But here's where it gets really interesting. By April 1925, Midgley was actually relieved of his position as vice president of the GM Chemical Company.
Right, the sources say due to inexperience in organizational matters.
Yeah, that's corporate speak. So he takes a leave of absence to deal with his lingering lead poisoning. But GM wasn't done with him.
Not at all.
Because they had another massive, incredibly dangerous problem that desperately needed a chemical miracle.
Out of the frying pan and into the ozone.
Exactly.
This brings us to the booming new industry of refrigeration and air conditioning. The Frigidaire division of General Motors was a leading manufacturer, but the refrigerants they relied on were nightmare chemicals.
Oh, they were terrifying. Ammonia, sulfur dioxide, chloromethane, propane.
Yeah, these are toxic, flammable, or highly explosive compounds sitting right inside your family's kitchen.
Literally a ticking time bomb. If an early refrigerator sprung a leak, it could silently poison a household in their sleep or just blow up the room.
So GM turns to their chemical puzzle solver. They need a non-toxic, non-flammable alternative. Midgley, working alongside a chemist named Albert Leon Henn, starts hunting through the periodic table again.
Back to the killer app.
Exactly. And they focus on a class of chemicals called alkyl halides.
And they decide to try something pretty radical. They incorporate fluorine into a hydrocarbon.
Which is counterintuitive.
Right, because a lot of chemists would have assumed this would be incredibly toxic. Fluorine is a highly reactive, very dangerous element.
But Midgley and Haney believed that the bond between the carbon and the fluorine would be so incredibly stable that it would never break down or release anything harmful.
And they were right about the stability. They synthesize dichlorodifluoromethane, the very first chlorofluorocarbon, or CFC.
Better known to the public by its brand name, Freon.
Freon. Think of the carbon-fluorine bond in Freon like a molecular locked vault.
Okay, I like that.
Midgley essentially believed he had locked all the reactive danger safely inside this microscopic vault. It was completely inert. You could breathe it in. It wouldn't catch fire. It wouldn't poison you.
You thought he had completely neutralized the threat to human life.
And he was right. But only in the short term, and only down here on the surface of the Earth.
Right. If we connect this to the bigger picture, we need to follow your vault metaphor to its conclusion.
Let's do it.
Down here, that vault was impenetrable. But Midgley had no idea that these tiny, locked vaults would eventually float 20 miles up into the stratosphere.
And what happens in the stratosphere?
The environment changes completely. Up there, they are bombarded by intense solar ultraviolet radiation. That UV light acts like a molecular blowtorch.
Oh, wow. So it melts the vault doors off.
Exactly. And what escapes from the vault is a rogue chlorine atom. That chlorine acts like a microscopic wrecking ball. It reacts with an ozone molecule, destroying it, but the chlorine atom survives the crash.
It just keeps going.
Yeah, it is then free to move on and destroy another ozone molecule. A single chlorine atom from a single molecule of Freon can go on to systematically destroy 100,000 ozone molecules.
That is terrifying. Midgley had inadvertently created a chain reaction that would tear a massive hole in the Earth's ozone layer.
And the contrast between his two great inventions is profound. With leaded gasoline, we were dealing with a known unknown.
Right, Midgley knew lead was a poison. He just didn't care to find out the long-term environmental threshold.
Exactly, but CFCs, Freon was a true unknown unknown. Human science didn't even fully understand the ozone layer in the 1920s.
Let alone the concept that a completely harmless-seeming refrigerator gas could deplete it or act as a massive greenhouse gas.
Exactly, and Freon revolutionized modern life. It made safe air conditioning possible, it became the propellant in aerosols, and it was even used in asthma inhalers.
Midgley was hailed as an absolute hero for this.
As the scientific community showered him with awards. He won the Perkin Medal, the Priestley Medal, which is the American Chemical Society's highest honor, and the Willard Gibbs Award.
He genuinely doubly believed he had saved countless lives by replacing toxic ammonia fridges with Freon.
And the tragic irony of his intentions versus his actual impact is almost Shakespearean, which leads us to the grim reality of his final years and the massive shadow his inventions cast over the rest of the 20th century.
Yeah, his final years are incredibly dark. In 1940, at the age of 51, Thomas Midgley contracts polio, and he is left severely disabled.
But he is still an engineer at heart.
Always. To give himself some independence, he devises this intricate system of ropes and pulleys over his bed, allowing him to lift himself up without any assistance.
It was a mechanical solution to a physical problem, his lifelong approach.
But on November 2nd, 1944, at the age of 55, Midgley is found dead at his home in Ohio. He had become entangled in his own rope device and died of strangulation.
Popular folklore loves to frame this as an ironic accident, the great inventor accidentally killed by his own machine.
Right, it's a very neat narrative.
But the historical record is much darker. The coroner actually ruled his death a suicide.
Wow. It casts a heavy shadow over a legacy that only gets more disturbing the further out you zoom. Author Bill Bryson remarked that Midgley possessed an instinct for the regrettable that was almost uncanny.
Uncanny is the right word. Let's look at the global statistics tied to his first invention alone.
Leaded gasoline.
Right. It released unprecedented quantities of lead into the global atmosphere. But the fallout wasn't just a matter of air quality. It triggered one of the most fascinating and terrifying sociological phenomena in modern history.
The lead crime hypothesis.
Yes.
This is where the story shifts from a chemistry lesson to a true crime thriller. The lead crime hypothesis is a deeply researched link between the era of airborne lead pollution and a massive surge in societal violence.
Remember earlier when we discussed how lead mimics calcium and enters the brain?
Yes, it crosses the blood-brain barrier.
Exactly. Well, in developing toddlers and children, lead specifically damages the prefrontal cortex. That is the part of the brain responsible for impulse control, emotional regulation, and aggression.
And Midgley's invention basically blanketed the world in a fine dust of these neurotoxins. Millions of children inhaled it right as their brains were forming.
And sociologists and economists eventually noticed a staggering correlation. If you look at a graph of atmospheric lead emissions and then you look at a graph of violent crime rates, they match up almost perfectly.
But with a 20-year time lag.
Exactly. When lead emissions spiked in the mid-20th century, violent crime spiked 20 years later, right when that specific generation of lead-exposed children reached adulthood.
Because they had fundamentally lower impulse control.
Right. And when leaded gasoline was finally phased out in the 1970s and 80s, violent crime rates plummeted 20 years after that all across the world.
So by poisoning the developing brains of an entire generation, Midgley's gasoline additive made the world a measurably more violent place for decades. He fundamentally altered human behavior on a global scale.
And then you add Freon to the ledger, which punched a literal hole in the atmospheric shield that protects all life on Earth from radiation.
Until it was finally phased out by the Montreal Protocol in 1987.
Right. It's really no wonder Time magazine included both leaded gasoline and CFCs on its list of the 50 worst inventions in history.
So what does this all mean? Put yourself in his shoes for a second. If you're Thomas Midgley Jr., you go to your grave in 1944 thinking you are a certified American hero. You think you fixed the modern automobile and made home refrigeration safe for families.
You don't live to see the global crime waves. You don't live to see the ozone hole.
Exactly. How do we reconcile the brilliant, award-winning problem solver with the title of one-man environmental disaster?
Well, I think Midgley's life is the ultimate masterclass in the necessity of critical systemic thinking.
What do you mean by systemic?
His fatal flaw wasn't malice, It was tunnel vision. He assumed that technology exists in a vacuum. He looked at engine knock or toxic fridges as isolated puzzles.
Just a mechanical friction point to smooth out?
Right. But fixing an immediate friction point without considering the holistic, broader environmental system is a recipe for disaster. We cannot invent our way out of a problem without asking what new problems the invention itself might create.
It is an incredible journey. I mean, from a kid curving baseballs with slippery elm bark to a man whose inventions literally altered the chemical composition of the Earth's atmosphere and global crime rates.
It really is.
It's such a cinematic story that the sources mention Hollywood is currently developing a feature film about him right now. It's called Midge. Co-written by Terrence Winter of Boardwalk Empire and The Sopranos fame.
Oh, that makes sense. It fits that tragic anti-hero mold perfectly.
It really does, and it leaves you with a thought that is honestly terrifying when you look at the world today.
How so?
Well, today we are surrounded by tech companies and brilliant engineers who are rapidly rolling out new miracle technologies, from artificial intelligence and algorithmic feeds to new synthetic forever materials.
And they are all designed to solve immediate friction in our lives.
Exactly. So if a mind as brilliant as Thomas Midgley Jr.'s couldn't foresee the ozone layer depletion or the global crime wave hidden inside his genius inventions, what modern Freon or ethyl are we enthusiastically adopting today, completely unaware of the unknown unknowns waiting for us 50 years down the line?
Wow. It definitely makes you look at every new technological convenience with a slightly more critical eye.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the sources. Keep asking questions, stay curious, and maybe always read the fine print on the next big miracle cure. Because sometimes the most dangerous things aren't the villains we can see, but the invisible innovations we embrace every single day.